right, good evening, folks. Welcome to this month's edition, the September edition of the Ujamaa Hour. I am your host, Michael Tekin Strode, founding coordinator of the Cohousing Collaborative, Chicago area time bank. Currently, Chicago's only, a time, skill, and labor exchange, otherwise known as a time bank, where we are facilitating community organizing, network weaving, collaboration across all types of spaces, and where we are fostering this idea of the solidarity economy in the city and thinking about how time banking interacts and connects and intersects with the solidarity economy in space. How are we able to assess and map what skills and capacities exist in our communities? How are we able to match that with the needs that exist in our communities? And how are we able to foster and facilitate ongoing relational conversation to keep people locked into the fact that there are existing capacities here, and they can be very well mapped and very well matched with the needs that exist here, and that if we think from that framework, then we potentially have a lot of what we need. I'm not going to say we have all of what we need, but we potentially have a lot of what we need within our communities. And so I want to ensure that the Cohousing Collaborative is well situated there, well suited there. And the fortunate thing about engaging in that conversation, engaging in that practice and facilitating it through that practice is that once I became acquainted with the solidarity economy, I realized that there are lots of spaces in the solidarity economy that could benefit from this facilitation as well, and that perhaps we're thinking about it from a distance, right? You kind of had it on the hand over here, like time banking is a good thing for the solidarity economy, but are there spaces where we are actually practicing and facilitating that? And so I've had the benefit of being able to drop into spaces and facilitate some of that conversation, that dialogue, that exchange, that mapping, and that has been a good thing, right? Because we are doing the work amongst ourselves relationally that will allow us to realize the flourishing of the solidarity economy. And I'm loving that, right? I'm loving that, the ability to be in that conversation, in that work, in that space. And the Ujamaa Hour, right, is an outgrowth of that exact same conversation. In Chicago, it was challenging in 2017, 2018. 2017 is the establishing year of the Cohousing Collaborative. 2018 is when I finally had my sea legs under me, and I realized that this wasn't an academic affair, but there was an organizing component that was active and needed to be nourished in terms of how I was engaging with the time bank. But trying to figure out how to locate the stories of the Black social and solidarity in Chicago, how to nourish, how to foster some of those conversations, some of those stories. It was difficult to find. And so the Ujamaa Hour became a way that I could broadcast some of the conversations that I was having in other spaces into the public view, bring it into the public discourse, and in that way, connect it to stories that perhaps people had in their hearts, had within themselves, but weren't sure were connected to the solidarity economy. And so through a lot of the conversations that we've had on the Ujamaa Hour over the course of almost 4 years, it's been that sort of, it's been building that sort of discussion, that sort of discourse, that storytelling, that narrative work, and mapping those stories together, connecting those stories together, connecting those histories together. What drives people to come into this space, to come into this work? What connects the work of people who don't necessarily think of themselves as solidarity economy organizers, but who are doing work that is deeply grounded in solidarity, in democracy, in mutualism, in participatory democracy, participation, that is deeply grounded in understanding that there are multiple ways towards liberation. What connects those folks together? And the Ujamaa Hour is where we have conversations and we try to draw some of those connections out. We try to draw some of those common threads out. And I just kind of sit on the periphery and look for the threads and try to weave them together. And so that is what we're doing here. This is your intimate and informal exploration of the Black social and solidarity economy through conversation. I could be mixing the adjectives up. Sometimes I say intimate and informal conversation, but hey, it's okay. It's my tagline. I can mess it up anytime I want. So what we do here before we get into the actual interview is that I give you a bit of an introduction to other things that are happening in my world and in the world of the Cola Collaborative, in the world of Chicago. And hopefully you see the intersection, you see the connection that exists between these things and the conversations that are happening on the Ujamaa Hour. So the first thing that I want to draw you into is something that I hinted upon. I touched upon this in last month's segment, the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission. So it's a mouthful, right? And I could really only touch upon it because in terms of how we talk about what redistricting is and why redistricting is maybe an important topic and how it relates to movement organizing that is ongoing, it's one of those things that is a little bit, it's a tweak. I admit that. It's like toying around the edges of a deeply fragmented, broken, fractured, well, I mean, yeah, not necessarily broken, working as it was designed, but toying around the edges of a system that is already unjust, right? So I acknowledge that, I hold that. But it is something that, when you talk about that framework, that matrix of resist, rebuild, reimagine, reform, it is certainly something where we can do a little bit of reformation as we move towards ultimately reimagining and rebuilding what we want to see on the other side. So I am safely on the other side of a press conference that was hosted by the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission earlier today. And during that period, we released what we are calling the People's Map, right? The People's Map of Chicago. And so I just want to give a glance at that. So this is the People's Map. And what does this mean? Historically, Chicago has been, a site, as with many major cities, of gerrymandering, right? The redistricting process has been confined to things that happen within spaces where aldermen have conversations amongst themselves, and eventually they present a map and they approve a map. And the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission is really trying to present what is a people's map, right? A map that is informed by the communities of interest that people have communicated to us. And they've communicated this to us in such a way that it's public, right? This is all public record. If you go on chicagoswards.org, the website that you see right at the top there, you can see every conversation that we've had about this map. You can see every testimony that we've taken, 183 throughout this process. You can see all of the shape files and all of the sort of, mapping process that we've gone through. And testimony is not closed, right? So this is like a first draft. This is a first draft of a map of the 50 wards of Chicago within the Chicago Advisory Redistricting Commission, which is an independent effort to redistrict these 50 wards. But we had the press conference today. We released this draft map. This is what we think could be the new lines of the wards in Chicago. And why is this critical, right? What is the reason for gerrymandering, right? Gerrymandering is explicitly a process to disempower the ability for Chicago's residents to elect the people that they would like to represent them. It's deliberately a process of trying to consolidate and conserve power within folks who potentially already have it. And so the redistricting process is just one small way to reform and provide citizen input into this total electoral process. And if we're using the phrase of one of the more recently developed coalitions, right? This is democracy beyond elections. So what does the democratic process look like beyond the, large elections, the large presidential cycles, and maybe even the sort of the interim, local cycles or local or municipal cycles. But what does democracy beyond elections look like? And this is the wards lines that are drawn determine the scope of resources, determines representation, determines where communities are bounded in terms of how they're able to communicate with their representatives even. So This is the first draft of the map that the commission has released. So we're really looking, for folks to actually provide testimony to continue developing this map, right? Because there perhaps are some imperfections in the map, and you can actually, if you look on the recordings of all of our meetings, you can see where we disagreed, right? You can see the moments where we actually were wrestling with the process of, are we moving in the direction that we want, that matches our principles, that matches our intent? And so, I really invite folks to take a moment to reflect on that map. Take a moment to really think about this process or this notion of democracy beyond elections, and really see what are some other, small things that we could be doing that actually is moving us towards the world we want to see. Again, redistricting, a very small one, and it's only one city. We did not actually have a process where we were able to recapture the state redistricting effort. So that still went through the Illinois legislature in another sort of, backroom deal. But, we want, and within the solidarity economy, what is it that we want? We want a democracy that is participatory, right? And this is one way that, we are trying to engage in participatory democracies, because ultimately for me, and this is on a sort of more personal level, because, if you look right down here in this little orange, that's where I live. On a more personal level, the confusion around where ward lines are drawn is also a confusion around who are my people, right? Who are my people in this community that I am supposed to be in conversation with and organizing alongside? Now, ultimately, I personally feel an affinity for all folks South Side, all folks, particularly Southeast Side, because I bike. I don't get a whole lot, of travel to other sides South. But, I feel an affinity for all folks South. And I certainly have, a connection to everyone in Chicago. But in terms of where I have the personal capacity to reach and to touch, I want to be in communication and I want to be in conversation with those folks. And it's made infinitely harder when, you have these weird wards, these lobster wards, these sort of spiral and fragments and fragmentations that travel along, very unusual shapes that are not compact, that are not contiguous. And we have tried to address that with this redistricting process that we've engaged in. So that's my long rant about redistricting. And, I just wanted folks to really be grounded in what is happening there and think about how you want to participate in that process. If you haven't testified, you should go to this website, chicagoswards.org, and submit, for oral or written testimony. You can even submit an actual drawing of a map. If you're like, my community looks like this, we invite that stuff. So this is about participatory democracy. This is about, people drawing a map that represents their communities, their neighborhoods. And, we are here to facilitate and support in that process. So I want to do one more thing before I introduce our guest. And that is going to be just a reflection. So you guys, I love the offers and needs market, and it's something that I have been passionate about passing on my love for. And so I wanted to facilitate, what would it look like to talk through a live offers and needs market? We won't get into, to it very deeply today, but I just want you to reflect on these questions, right? Because there are going to be more offers and needs markets coming in the near future. So, in both in Chicago and amongst some of these some other spaces and entities, some places nationally that I'm angling towards, some places locally that I'm looking to host. But think about your offers. What are you passionate about? What resources are you connected to? What hidden talents would you love to share with another person? And what is something that people always ask you about? These are your offers. These are not your only offers. And oftentimes you hide, not only you don't go blue sky with your offers. It's not just about what you have, but it's about what you're connected to. It's about the people that you know. And so recognizing what you have to offer to your community and recognizing what you have to offer beyond your community starts with a little bit of reflection. And, oftentimes when we do this offers market reflection period, we'll just have about, 7 to 10 minutes of writing where people just like take these questions and just go write. And then we'll pivot to the pitch. And we're not going to do the pitch, but, we'll pivot to the pitch. But, an example of the pitch. My name is Mike. I offer a background in meeting design and facilitation to support your community meetings. I am available on a scheduled basis sometimes. Location can be Chicago-based or virtual, willing to accept barter or time bank credits or dollars, depending upon the type of support needed. But ultimately, that's a thing that I offer. It's a thing that I love to do. It's a thing that I take joy in. And so, it's a thing that I pitch out often in my offers market. And then we pivot and we go to the needs market pitch. What is a challenge that you're experiencing right now? What is something that you would like to learn? What is a resource you would like to be connected to? What is something you need the support of other people to do? And this usually triggers another 7 to 10 minutes of written reflection because we want people to ground in this, right? And then when we come out, we pitch again. So my name is Mike. I need support in thinking through a citywide facilitators network. This is not urgent. The network would be located in Southeast Chicago, but I will accept virtual support, and I can offer payment of barter, trade, time bank credits, or dollars as necessary, right? And so notice, just offers, needs. And usually at the end of this arc, we will send people into the time bank and we will say like, look, you've developed at least 3 offers and 3 needs that could be on the time bank, and you should be time banking. And this is how we facilitate this mapping. This is how we facilitate people thinking and shifting their thinking about community building. And so I just wanted to offer a small space for reflection on the offers and needs market process tonight. And so that was one thing that I wanted to ground in. And the final thing before I dip to our guest is not in my scenes list, or it's not readily available. No, it is readily available. Chief John Horse. On my way to back from Atlanta, I was listening to this podcast called Black Cowboys, and there are certainly some problematic episodes in there, but that's about the problematic history of colonialism and people trying to find liberation in different ways, right? But Chief John Horse of the Black Seminole Nation, and the story of Chief John Horse is the story of the Seminoles really wrestling with trying to find a home after they were forced out of Florida, right? This is at a time when there is solidarity between the Seminole Nation and the Black Seminole Nation, right? I mean, they are one peoples, right? And so as we see this sort of exodus from Florida and then being forced, to other territories, Chief John Horse was critical in helping in co-liberating, with another war chief in the Seminole Nation, the nation to Mexico, right? So just finding a way to sneak across the border to Mexico, find a new homeland for the Seminole Nation, so they did not have to be continued to be forced into the colonial reservation states, that many indigenous tribes and nations were that stayed here. So I've really been bringing Chief John Horse into many meetings, and I encourage you to go listen to that episode of Black Cowboys on Chief John Horse, because it was a stellar story, and it's something that's been resonating with me for a while. So with that, I'm through rambling, and we are on to our next movement. So I want to go ahead and bring forward our guest for this evening. We have Hafidha Acuay of PeoplesHub. PeoplesHub is an online training organization connecting and supporting groups across geographies in order to build more powerful, thriving, and transformative movements. They are founded on the belief that people at groups building power can change the world, right? People in the grassroots building power can change the world. So Hafidha is a program coordinator with PeoplesHub, and I have experienced the radical virtual hospitality and inclusive hosting that is key to the work that that Hafidha brings to these spaces. And so with that, I want to go ahead and bring in our guest, Hafidha. Welcome to the Ujamaa Hour. Let me see. Are you? Oh, yes, you have muted yourself, so you have to unmute.
Hello,
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Ujamaa Hour. How are you?
I'm well. I enjoyed all the pre-talk. I was really into it. Now I'm gonna have to go back and watch all the old episodes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, delighted to have you on this evening. So, bios are always too short, and I'm never great at a bio. So I really want people to in your own words, like who is first of all Hafidha Acuay, and you can correct me because your voicemail was very distinct and very in tone, and I want folks to hear that in your voice, but also your background, your bio. Who is Hafidha?
Well, my name is Hafidha Acuay, and I do use she/her pronouns. And who am I? I am from New York. I was born in Queens, and I don't know. That seems really important. The older I get, especially because I'm living 3,000 miles away in Seattle, Washington, and I've been out on the West Coast for most of my, maybe all of my adult life. So, but I still feel like I'm a New Yorker on the inside, and my parents grew up there. So, yeah, and then I guess briefly I'll say I grew up um, pretty, blue collar, working class. My biological father's from Cuba, but I was raised by my African American father and my African American mother, and also I was raised Muslim, which is pretty important. I was Muslim the first 25 years of my life and was very religious and very much a student of the religion, and so that's informed a lot of who I am and how I move, even after I left the religion. I'm still a very spiritual person, just not a Muslim. And then I'm also a mom, which is really important. I have an almost 13-year-old, and I feel like I've known this child for about 25 years. So it feels like I feel like that has become as much a part of my identity as like any of the other things I've mentioned at this point. And yeah, I guess those are some good basics about me.
Excellent, excellent. And we've named People's Hub as a home of sorts, for you. And I just want to give space for any other political or work homes that you also want to kind of bring into the conversation in addition to People's Hub before we kind of dig into those.
I also work So I work at People's Hub full time, and then I have a part time job as well. Here locally, it's Families of Color Seattle, and we are an organization that really works to resource families that have children of color. So that Seattle, as many people know, and Washington State, it's a very white place. It's the dominant culture is very white, and more importantly, the people of color communities are currently very dispersed and don't have a lot of they don't have like a lot of critical mass. So they're spread out. They've been scattered by gentrification, by all kinds of things, economics, and just sort of political will to drive them out and remove their power. So raising a child of color in Seattle is a very it's different than raising a child of color in Atlanta, or even like in New York, where I grew up in Queens, where we were everywhere. We could see ourselves everywhere, even if we were segregated. So anyways, the organization works to resource families that are raising children of color and helping with like racial analysis and building racial analysis among parents for their children. So I really enjoy working for two different organizations that are doing different things, but I do program coordination at both. Because again, People's Hub, as you mentioned earlier, is sort of this sort of national, much larger umbrella, and it works to kind of empower local groups. So then, actually working with the local group is really nice because it just gives me a different perspective. Yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's talk about how you landed and how you arrived at People's Hub and what's the sort of journey? What is it about these values? And we've named a few values that you, or I've seen a few values named, that you hold as your underline, right? Anti-racism, liberated learning, commitment to social solidarity, economy, healthy democratic forms, systems of governance. So there are these values, and then there's People's Hub. What is the path or the journey that leads you there?
Well, I got involved with People's Hub about 3 years ago, maybe a little more than that. I was brought in by Elandria Williams, who was the ED until they passed away last year, last September. Actually, next week is mm, it's about 10 days away from the first anniversary of Elandria's passing. So I was brought in as a really close friend of Elandria's to provide we used to facilitate and train together. So we used to do anti-racism, anti-oppression trainings together. And I was brought in not so much to do a little bit, not so much to do training, but to do tech support and to help with just kind of creating these. At the time, this was pre-pandemic, people were not really doing workshops online. Everybody was just like, why would I do that online? We always, like people just did, were not, it was just not a thing. And, but Elandria and others saw that, it was founded in part to reach people who can't normally access training. They might be volunteers, they might be, just community groups that are not 501c3s, don't have any budget whatsoever, or they might be groups that have a budget, but they just can't afford to be flying everybody out to go to a 6-hour training or a day-long training, because those things are not super accessible in terms of cost. So the idea was, how about if we can provide groups that need training, and people that need training with it in a way that's more affordable, um, by doing it virtually. So we were using Zoom and all of that. And so that's where the main thing I did as a contractor was provided tech support for these online workshops. And it was really interesting. It was quite a thing to try to sell people on at the time. And of course now, you know, that's not necessary, but the whole point was that by making it online, you're making it more accessible. And by making it more accessible, it means it's accessible to people who don't have money, who might be disabled, who might have children and can't travel, which was the case for me. I used to go around with Elandria and other people and do these anti-racism and anti-oppression trainings. And I stopped that completely because I got pregnant and had a baby. So I could not just take off for weekends and go and lead 25 people through some weekend long process around race and systemic racism and things. So um, so moving it online, was the idea was, not only does it open it up to people who are training, who are receiving training, but it also opens it up to trainers who would otherwise be limited. So people like myself, people who are home with their small children, and it's just not feasible or worth it to be traveling around like that. um, but yeah, I think the whole idea was to just open things up a little bit more and kind of break some of the sort of the cliquish thing that happens with conferences and workshops, and sort of this elite sort of group of people who have the money and the funding to go and get training on all kinds of random things. Like, everybody needs some training, everybody needs some support. And so that's how I got like looped into that. And then last year, after the pandemic, of course, the demand for how to doing things online was really, really high. People's Hub was sort of this, sort of like flooded with requests for help us know how to do this. And I think the really important thing is, like, we don't do webinars at People's Hub. We've never done webinars. It's always been using popular education, which is all about education for building power and for making change, like actual felt real change. And to do that, you have to have people engaged, that you can't just be talking at them. So we had a leg up, I guess, in that regard, and really have been trying to have some influence in the ways that groups are holding their meetings, holding their trainings or their workshops, and not just resorting to sort of the corporate way of doing things, which is just webinars and like presentations. It's like, no, 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 you need to get out of presentations if you're actually trying to help people build up skills or learn, because people learn better when they're engaged.
Hmm.
That was kind of a long answer to your question, but
No,
um,
no, that was a stellar answer, and it was a stellar answer because organizers can see the future, and I can certainly admit, and I guess it's not like I'm in poor company or anything like that, right? When I first encountered like the the full story of People's Hub at New Economy Coalition member meeting in Asheville. Um, I was like, yeah, this is great, and also I'm never going to use it, but it, or at least it was something that like I'm going to use it, but it's way in the back. It's on the back shelf. It's like it's a thing that I know is going to be useful. I just don't have the immediate application to it, and so yeah, so I was certainly in that camp, and even that's stated, even being someone who is participating in a process with time banking, which also was like way on the back shelf of what people thought about in terms of like, yeah, we want to map communities, but like, I mean, that seems like a quirky, weird way to do it. And then, I mean, folks are, the mutual aid moment happens, and folks are like, yo, we really need to know what's happening with neighbors, what neighbors have, where neighbors are, what their needs are. And it becomes this thing where it's like, yes, this is a practice space. Like, this is a practice space. And so one of the things I would want you, and maybe this is definitely the entry point for the radical hospitality. Um, I have found that like the improvements that I've made by participating in more inclusive virtual hosting and that radical hospitality space are really improving my in-person trainings. Right? It's a transformational notion to like say, the adaptations you're making here need to show up everywhere else. So I want to pitch that to you and see how that connects to radical hospitality for you.
yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Mike. I think absolutely. I mean, that makes me happy to hear that you've taken some of these practices and they've been applicable and that you have applied them. And I because I totally believe that that is correct. I think one of the things that this moment, or now it's been an 18-month long moment, but this moment has sort of afforded is because had to um so many people had to pivot, and like they were really just thrown off, like people who were so comfortable with doing things the way they'd been doing them for years or decades. All of a sudden they were beginners. Like they were, I watched so many people who were facilitators, very skillful in person, or at least they were experienced. They had to suddenly figure out how to do this all again, and that's what they thought. And I would tell people, because I do a lot of coaching around this, it's like you have the skills of facilitation. You just need to interpret them or translate them to this online format. But like you're not at square zero, you're not at square one or whatever. But people felt so shaken up, by the whole experience that in some ways they had kind of two general responses. They either just kind of shut down, I can't do it, I can't do it, or I don't want to do it. I hate Zoom. I hate that I have to do things like this, just sort of in denial. And then the other one was, well, you know, we're all, it's kind of a level playing field in the sense that like we're all having to learn something new. And so the people who like seize the opportunity to just sort of like learn, I think that they're going to be much better facilitators, like even if they never do another online one again, because not only did they have to learn how to do things online, they had to learn about access, and if they were taking a People's Hub workshop, they had to learn about, beyond accommodations, where it's just like, do we have, kind of ticking the box of like, do we have captions? But like, even just thinking about, are people comfortable? Are people able to learn when they show up? Like, how do they feel when they come in this space? Do they feel like harried and rushed and stressed out? Do they feel guilty because they showed up late? What are all of these obstacles to people actually learning when they show up here? And then, of course, there was so much more like demonstrated compassion for people, recognizing that we're in a pandemic that's like killing people and making people ill, And then, or they've lost their jobs. Like, so many people were in crisis or various types of crises at various times, that there was just this real general acceptance, at least in the non-profit and movement organization sort of spaces, to just, be show some empathy for people. And again, I think that was looks like a moment where it's like you should always be showing empathy for people, not just during a pandemic, but the opportunity to kind of practice, like, actually doing check-ins, or making sure, checking in with folks and saying, hey, I notice, that you just got here. Here's where we are in the program right now, and I'm so glad to see you. Like, actually just doing those kinds of things, um, putting on the captions, um, putting on some music during the break or in the entrance, during the entry times, instead of it just being this cold, harsh, like you just walk into a freezer kind of a environment and nobody looks at you when you walk in the room, like using the chat box to greet people and to give people a chance to introduce themselves without interrupting, quote unquote, everything that's happening. I think all those kinds of, I think it just sort of, people had to do something a little different. And then I'm hoping that when they're in person, it does feel weird for you to be in the middle of a training and somebody comes in and, like, nobody greets them. Like, that should feel weird because it is weird. Or if somebody, not having anybody available to make sure that people can get in the room, like, you should have somebody stationed at the door or make sure that everyone's accounted for. So just, like, actually, one of the things we say at People's Hub is, like, it should matter that a person is there. Like, they should feel like if they weren't there, something different would actually be happening. And if and it should feel like if they weren't there, it's not that it would be necessarily bad, but it would be different, because they actually do have an impact. They actually contribute something. And not only do they have something to contribute, the whole point of popular education is, like, you are trying to get them to share their contribution because you need their contribution. So I think just that feeling of, like, does it even matter if I show up to this thing? Um, that's the thing that we really, really emphasize, that yes, it does matter, and we want you to feel like you matter, and we want you to actually matter, and we want everybody else here to know that you matter. And unfortunately, what I am still seeing is there's still a lot of places where that's just not the case. Like, people can just drop off and it doesn't they actually have no impact on the content. So we're trying to change that, like, one workshop at a time, I guess.
Yes, yes. This is a bit of a wild card, perhaps, but I mean, maybe it connects to this notion about what other identities feel most salient to you. Um, but one key thing that I want to name that I tell folks all the time, like, and I'm naming this because I just came back from Atlanta, big house music, dance festival. I acknowledge that I went to a big festival in this period, and it was after a year of, like, not going to anything dancing. But dancing is really critically important to me. But dancing has taught me a lot about facilitation, and to your point, right? I dance in pretty unconventional ways, right? I mean, I participate in house music dance, but I also bring a lot of instruments. And the instruments were this way that when I was dancing, I was exhausted with, like, people being on the periphery and feeling like they could not jump in because maybe they felt like there were better dancers on the floor, whatever. But it was this way of, like, engaging people and drawing them into the circle, right? So that like we basically, there's probably a metaphor around there about, like, about the periphery being malleable, right? We can move the edges of the circle, and everybody can drop into the circle, and no one has to feel like they are on the edges or on the periphery. Everyone is in the center. Everyone is centered. So I'm saying that, like, dancing, it has taught me a lot about facilitation. But maybe what is one of the identities that you hold, or that you would name, that is maybe unconventional, that has taught you a lot about facilitation? That's
Ooh, that is a. I didn't see that one coming. Because
understood.
I'm just trying to think. I was going to ask you some questions about the dancing. Um, I was like, is it like, do you do, like, the jerky dancing, or are you, like, one of those, like, jerk, jerk, jerk? I don't know how to. I call it janky dancing, where it's like
Yes,
it's more angular, or are you
yes,
more like a swirl? I don't know. So, anyways, maybe I'll ask you that later.
absolutely.
I would say, I don't know. I mean, it's hard because I feel like I've managed to surround myself with people who I'm not that weird with. Like, I'm not, like, I don't feel very unconventional, but, but I would say probably being an unschooler. So I myself, I mean, I did not, I stopped going to school at 12. Or at least I stopped going to like K through 12 schools at 12, kind of, but then I did go back when I was like 16, 17. So that's, but just part time. And then I went to college, or I went to college. It's a long story and it's very convoluted, but in essence, from 12 on, I was unschooled. So my parents took me out of school, and like a month into my 12th year of life, my first month or two in middle school or junior high school, as they used to call it, in New York, and I was homeschooled. My mom tried homeschooling with like an actual curriculum, but then she wasn't very good about monitoring that, and I wasn't very good about doing it. So we just became unschoolers, and now I have a almost 13-year-old who's also an unschooler their entire life. So that's pretty different because we just are not part of the public or private educational system. And I love education, like I love learning, and I've been to college for a lot of years. And I've always taken this love of learning and like lifelong learning sort of approach to life. That's definitely a big identity for me. Is just lifelong learning, which I also call like liberated learning, where it's very self-directed, but also kind of based on what are your needs and what are the needs of the people around you. So like you need to learn things so that you can contribute and be a part of your family or your community. So that's a pretty big one, and I'm all about liberated education for youth, but also for adults. And some of the same problems that we see. I mean, one of the things that I see a lot with trainings in general, online trainings, is like people really just replicating the sort of all of the like most oppressive dynamics and the most oppressive practices, spaces that are supposed to be for adults and that are supposed that you don't even have to go to. It boggles my mind that they actually do have the opportunity to do things differently, or to do things in a way that is just more enjoyable and more restorative, and they're so trained in the schooling ways that they just perpetuate them. They want to dominate the conversation as the teacher, and they don't really care what people have to say except for like anything that validates them. And um, it's just really interesting the amount of control people feel like they need to have in learning spaces. So I definitely think about that, and I'm thinking about that in almost every space that I go to.
Hmm. Yeah, that definitely lands, and I yeah, I'm definitely focused on when I'm planning workshops. I'm thinking about that process of where's the self direction going to show up, and how can I make sure that like at every point that I can, I'm like exiting myself from the equation, exit like not prescribing much of anything except some loose boundaries, and then people can explore and find new learnings, and then we debrief, and then it's like, hey, what'd you pick up there? And so it's that's a very critical part, and that actually connects to a conversation that we had last month with Play Cousins Collective, where I named that, like, had I known what I know now, as my daughter was in this um cultural African centered cultural school, and back in like fourth grade, I probably would not have made the moves that I did to kind of negotiate public schooling, because it was just terrible, the terrible experience. And Play Cousins Collective, made me very envious of, like, wow, like I wish I'd had some moral support to help me not make that move, or not stay there, where we didn't need to be. So,
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, here where I'm at, homeschooling and unschooling is pretty common, and it's very structurally, there's a lot of accommodations for it, and homeschoolers and unschoolers have a lot of options. There's not a lot of homeschoolers of color. and certainly very few Black homeschoolers. I think, which is sad because it means that by homeschooling, my kid has less access to other kids of color because everything is just dominated by white people here. Everywhere you go, it's just like you're always a minority. But what not participating in that system has done for us is it's actually just given us our time back. So it's like I mean, I would once in a while I would think, oh, maybe am I doing the right thing? And then I'd hear, my friends whose kids are in school and they're talking about like the calendar and having to just like they have to jump through so many hoops for this. Like everything is according to what's best for the school, not what's best for their kids, not what's best for their family or their own like lifestyle as a family. And I just think, nope, claiming my time. I don't even want to deal with it. I don't even want to think about it. I don't have to think about it. I don't like that is just one less system for me to have to conform to or to worry about or to center in my life or in my child's life. And I have no regrets. I mean, if I could have changed anything, it would have just been having like a community of Black, unschoolers, that we could have, been a part of. But I don't, I don't, I don't miss or regret not giving my time and my attention to this system that is just not here for me or my kid. So
All right,
yeah,
and that feels like reaffirmation. We've said that these conversations are about templates, and like that means that Play Cousins Collective needs to be everywhere. Okionu Birth Foundations needs to be giving every new mom, 6 weeks. Well, no, pardon me, every new family. They didn't say moms. They said families, whole families get 6 weeks of meals postpartum, and so like yeah, everywhere those sorts of supportive structures need to be happening and built. So. Um,
that's a really yeah. I think 6 weeks of free meal. Yeah, I did training as a doula, and the postpartum period is so important. So yeah, anything that helps and supports families in the postpartum. I mean, at the end of the day, whether it's like facilitating something, I mean, or talking about working with kids or working with new families or young families, um, it's just like, what do people need to actually feel alive and healthy and not like they're just like barely hanging on with by like their fingertips and like just dragging themselves to the next thing and like dragging themselves to the next thing, which that's kind of how it is out there. Is like people are living like that. They're just living by the minute, like just okay, I got another, just kind of in that whole hamster wheel or rat race thing. And it's just we all know it's not sustainable, and it certainly isn't liberating. And a lot of times people just don't feel like they have any choice. Like even when they do have a choice, they just like, I mean, I've had conversations with some people, some parents who are very frustrated with the way their schools were doing things, and they're like, I don't know why my kid has to do this. And I'm like, they don't have to do anything the school is saying. And they're just looking at me like, but the teacher, and I'm like, it's your kid. Like you can send them there, but your child doesn't actually have to do any of these things. And sometimes the children are really small. They're 5 or 6. And I'm like, they don't even have to legally go to school until they're 7. And
yeah,
then the parents are like, really? So, I mean, I'm just blown away at like how people don't even know all of the choices that they have.
yeah.
They're so accustomed to just doing as they're told or just doing things the way that they've always been done. And I don't know. There's a lot of work to be done to help
Absolutely.
people.
Um, so so I want to definitely ask about the connection and the intersection of all of these different areas that you've discussed to solidarity economy. But before I do, I really like that sort of hero's journey of like refusing the call. So there have been some transformations in you've made in your life, from changing religions, from where the one you were sort of rooted in, and so I'm wondering about where in your journey in your life have you seen this calling and perhaps refused it, or has it just been like, I mean, you were rooted in unschooling, so you were like, I mean, I always see where my calling is, and I'm just gonna curiously navigate towards it. So
I do think unschooling made me permanently weird. and kind of just especially because I unschooled at an age where like normally people identify with their peers, 12, basically my entire adolescence, which is normally where people sort of peer identify and they like figure out who they are based on who their friends are or what they're listening to. And I was so clueless and just listened to whatever I wanted to listen to and read whatever I wanted to read and didn't get too much feedback about that. So um, I've just given up on like fitting in. Like I just that's just never been a desire of mine. So I think, yeah, I think I'm a little headstrong in the sense of like if I don't feel good about this or I don't want to do that thing, I just don't do it. I would say how it can relate um, to just sort of like what I do at People's Hub is there has to be, I think, this willingness to just be creative and think like, we're having this problem and we just keep hitting our heads against like these really crappy meetings or these really, unengaging webinars that we're doing. Why not do something else? Like just experiment, just try something different. Like if you can try it once and if it doesn't work, then you don't have to do it ever again. But at least you got a little bit closer to maybe a solution or a little bit closer to something better. It's this willingness to just keep doing the same thing and complaining about it or expecting somebody else to step in and like make things better. I think that is a really I don't know. There's something around. I mean, I think you were talking earlier about governance, and I mean that's a big piece of People's Hub is like helping to just kind of work through these issues of like shared governance and democratic governance and what does it mean to share power and to share leadership. And part of what it means is like, oh, there's nobody coming to fix this. Like me having a problem with this, if I talk to my neighbors, I talk to my, coworkers, or I talk to these other people in my, whatever, my little group that I'm doing something with, and we all agree like there's a problem here. We can all agree on a problem, then what's to stop us from at least experimenting or playing with different solutions? Um, and I used to live in a co-housing community for about 4 years, and we were self-managed. So if somebody didn't like the lighting on the common house. Well, are you going to do something about it? What are you going to like? There's no manager to call and be like, I'm going to complain and I want you to send a maintenance man out here. It's like, no, we're the maintenance people. We're the ones who have to buy the lights if we're going to change them. Like we have to make those decisions. And I think that ownership of the problem and then the ownership of like the decision making and like those are really tough things for people. So even when you do have control, like the parent whose kindergartner is being bullied by the teacher and they're like, what, I don't know what to do. It's like, pull the kid out of there. And they're just like, they can't even fathom it. It's like even when we do have our control, we just are not always willing to take it because we're just not used to it. So I think whenever we can in any of these spaces, it could start with something as small as like these meetings are just dehumanizing. Like we're meeting online. Everybody's just wants to go to sleep or they don't even want to be here. Like that is something so small. It's not systemic. It's literally just your meeting. You can change it. So, or you have somebody who people are like, I can't access this meeting because you're talking over each other and there's no closed captioning. You can change that little behavior and make the spaces that you do have power over that much better, like that much more welcoming, that much more inclusive. And I think by doing those kinds of things, by just making change in the spaces where you can, it just gives you some confidence that you can change some bigger things. You can change things in spaces that maybe you have to fight with people a little bit about. Or in some cases, you're just completely opposed to each other. But it starts with like just the stuff that you're encountering every day.
Hmm. Yeah, the story I often tell that's maybe not the total origin point of my facilitation, but it is one point. The earlier origin points are like circle keeping, but
Mhm.
I read a book on consensus and I was like, oh, meetings could have a structure. The notion that like, oh, I don't have to come into a meeting unsure about what's about to be discussed, unsure about where we're headed, unsure about who's leading what conversations. we can allocate some of that. And I mean, meetings can have an agenda, and perhaps early on I was a little bit more prescriptive, and now I've learned to be a bit more loosely held with an agenda. um, but yeah, just learning that, like, oh, I could participate in fixing this meeting, and I don't actually have to lead the meeting. I could just make suggestions from the side, and those small changes could address really big challenges in this meeting space. Were tremendous for me, so I
That's
definitely
good.
received that. So I want to ask, because one of the things that I share in our Solidarity Economy 101 training that we've been doing, or at least maybe I've shared it informally in a couple of them, but not sort of in the actual curriculum. But I'm very interested in the the cultural practice of, like, the governance dimensions of the solidarity economy. And for me, like, learning some of these techniques of good and clear inclusive facilitation, anti-oppressive facilitation, have informed me to think, okay, this is the governance dimension. This is the center of, like, all of these different practices. So I'm really interested in how you relate, all of your work, your radical hospitality, your inclusive facilitation, all of these dimensions of your work, liberated learning, to the solidarity economy, and where they fit in the practice of solidarity economy. What do you see as how your work advances or connects to solidarity economy?
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest pieces with how it connects is that, the solidarity economy is challenging the profit first. So when you're dealing with liberated learning, what were the other things you mentioned? Inclusive spaces and like radical hospitality, it's centering people, and it's centering like caring for them. So it's those things. Caring for people is 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 at the center. That's what you're, when you're coming together, you're doing something, and you're doing it in a way where you're not causing harm. But even more than that, you're understanding that this work is very depleting, and people suffer from burnout and all these things. We know the world that people are coming into these spaces from, and they are, for most marginalized people, they are very abusive, toxic, all those things, right? So people are coming in like almost like seeking refuge. And so the spaces that you create need to be spaces where they actually feel cared for, because those are going to be the spaces that, one, feed them, but also they're going to want to be there. So you don't want them to leave your spaces feeling like they've been extracted from. So the solidarity economy is all about the economy that you need to have so that people's needs can be met, and also so that they can, feel like it's worth being alive. It's like we need to have food, and we want to have clothes, and we want to have beautiful, furniture and art, and we want to be able to travel, and there's all these things we want to do. But how can we get those things done without it being in an extractive way? So, like, with your time bank, like, people have these skills that they want to have, or they need something, but how can they get it in a way where they don't have to go and like subject themselves to more, like, you know wage slavery to get it. So I think it's connected just in the sense, I mean, probably in multiple senses, but primarily in the sense of the meeting people's needs is at the core of it, not meeting the needs of like moneymakers or profiteers or just some system that exists that we're just sort of there to perpetuate. It's like that system is not what's most important. It's actually the people who are there are what's important. Does that answer your question? Or I feel like I might have missed something there.
Yeah, no, no, it's really just, it's definitely that definitely answers part of the question, and the other part, I'm just wondering, do you feel like, there's a this center, like, the center of these practices is that we need better facilitation distributed amongst multiple people, so that all of these different practices can work, right? Whether it's, developing these assembly spaces, developing, you talked about the co-housing and how, cooperative spaces have to operate. Like, in order for us to collaborate, we need to know something about this radical hospitality and facilitation.
Yeah, yes, you're reminding me of something I wanted to mention. I mean, there's two pieces of it. There's the sort of the building, like what do we need to have, which is we need to have care. But then the other piece, which is I think the real sticking point and where we get really hung up, is well, what do you do when like what are you resisting? Like because the fact of the matter is we've all been socialized in a very extractive, hyper individualist society. Or not, maybe not all of us, but many of us have been socialized in this way. And, where there's just very top down, authoritarian. A lot of times this comes up with parenting, right? So there's like the authoritarian parenting, and then there's what they call the permissive parenting. So you have people who are like, I know I don't want to beat my kid. I know I don't want to be, authoritarian and just like have rules and just come down hard on them. But I don't know how to parent any other way because that's how I was parented. And so what they do is they do nothing. They let their kid roam all over the place, smack strangers, stay up all night, eat nothing but junk food, like, and their children are wild. And it's like they're not really parenting their children because they're afraid of like repeating the mistakes. But then what happens is either they can't really tolerate that, so then they kind of inconsistently are authoritarian, right? Because that's their go-to move. Or, they just kind of kick their kids out. They're like, you're too wild. I can't manage you. Go be an adult somewhere else. So that same kind of thing happens in spaces where people are trying to not replicate, you know, maybe not authoritarian government, but like, capitalist ways or like corporate ways, so they're like, we don't want to have it where we tell you what to do. So we're just not going to tell you anything. So then you have these meetings with no structure, no agenda. And everyone's just like, this is horrible. We're not getting anything done. We've been checking in for like 6 hours. We still have all these to do items. We're in processing hell. Um, and so what happens then, people sort of, if they don't see that that's working, then they start to just kind of go back to, well, the old ways were not great, but it was the best system that we had. It's like capitalism isn't great, but it's the best system that we have. Or, the government that we have now, it's not great, but it's the best system that we have, versus like really, um, like it's just more like a pendulum response versus like an actual living and dwelling in the fact that we have to create something new and we have to resist um, the call to just do things the way that they feel comfortable, even if they're harmful and we know they're harmful. We can't resort to that. But I think what's missing in there is that willingness. I think with the care, like if we continue to center care, then I think we have to stay creative. We have to like think, okay, we know that we're not going to discard this person. We want everybody here to feel the way that they need to feel. So how can we make that happen? Like you actually have to be committed to solving those problems. That's where the piece around like you own this. There isn't like a single answer. There isn't somebody who's going to come and fix everything for you. So how you create going to meet these people's needs or meet this person's needs. So I think so much of it has to do with being creative, but also like wanting to actually care, like wanting to actually solve this problem or address this issue, and not just giving up and going back to the way you've always done things. So sometimes people will be very, very difficult to deal with. Sometimes, there's some kind of block, and you have to sort of say, okay, I can either turn around and turn back, or I'm going to figure out how to cross this block. I might need to ask for help. I might need to go around it. I might need to sit and think on this. I might need to pray on this. Like there's many, many different tactics. Um, but you have to be committed and willing to like, no, we actually are going to cross this rock. It's actually not an option to turn back, because turning back just means going back to harmful ways and ways that are not caring, that ways that are not life-giving. So I hope that made sense, but in my mind, it all connects. So
Absolutely. No, you elaborated in a way on a phrase that I've just kind of been rotating and rolling around in my head, recently, that like capitalism is a map fronting like it's the territory, and it's just that
Mm.
we have just we're definitely so accustomed to using that map that, like, when the brush, rubs against our legs, and we're like off trail and we're like trying to blaze a new path. It's like, oh God, this is so rough. Let's just grab this old map, and follow that. It's yeah. So and it's a bundle of all of these other things, that we are bringing back into our space, which are like, coercive work conditions, right? We can coerce ourselves in collaborative spaces because we're like so used to coercion, like, how do you get accountability? Let's coerce, so, yeah. So
Yes, as a parent, this also sounds familiar.
I have had to, I've introduced myself in space and said, yes, I am a solidarity economy organizer and I believe in participatory democracies. And I have not always had a democratic household. I have not always brought these values home, and I'm thinking about that, right? I reflect on that, and it becomes more important because my child is now 19, and so there are all these ways that, like, oh, like, now it kind of comes home to roost because you can't just like say, this is the mandate that I have laid down and you must do. Let's engage, let's dialogue, let's talk about like why this might be a good direction. I'm kind of an advisor now, so it's and that's a practice we could be doing all throughout. And maybe we saw the map, we saw the parenting map, and we were like, well, but the map is here. Let's follow the map. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean all of our relationships that we have. I mean, with kids, it's good practice because they're with you every day when they're little. But in general, I mean, all of our relationships are opportunities to practice just just more care centered ways of being. I think I also like I sort of now my the closest thing I have to a spiritual tradition is Buddhism, and so it's all about practice, 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 and like every the most mundane things are opportunities to try something new. And I think what I really am amazed at when I go into training spaces is just how tight people are. Like people are really they want to be they're like little children in some ways. Like they want to be right, they want to be okay, they want to be approved, they want to be doing the right thing, or at least they want to be getting like approval. And my internal unschooler is just like, who cares? you know, but like, because, you can get approval for doing horrible things. But I think in order for us to make change in terms of like solidarity economy things, people really have to start to feel comfortable with like making decisions for themselves and also just like taking leadership or taking ownership and working with other people, like again, not deciding that somebody deferring to somebody who's not actually there, who doesn't have any more power than you to actually make those changes. It's a lot of work. All of these things, to do them well, like parenting, facilitating, decision making, collaborative decision, they all take so much more time.
Yeah.
So we do have to kind of get used to the fact that, first of all, we're learning how to do these things. And second of all, even if you do them well, they're not usually fast. And then like, how do you skill up everybody that you're working with to have those skills? Like it really does take a lot of practice. So I would say never, never, never turn down an opportunity to practice these skills of like listening, care, centering care, um, and like taking ownership with other people. So.
Absolutely. And now we just want to take a brief break to just look forward in the schedule, and then we'll come back for the final word from Hafidha, as and talk about where you can find People's Hub as well as any call to actions you have. So, Now we'll just look ahead in the schedule. So we are on our September edition of the Ujamaa Hour, but next month you can look forward to a conversation in October with Lee Jordan of Black Yield Institute. In November, Lex Barlow, possibly talking about Central Brooklyn Food Co-op, or another cooperative or collaborative space that they have entered into. And then in December, I'm hoping to make introduction or loop Janae Taylor in here from Highlander, so we can talk about some of the cultural aspects of the solidarity economy. And so look forward to that. We have three more conversations this year, and also if there are folks that you think should be looped in for the 2022 edition of the Ujamaa Hour, you can email me at connect, CONNECT, at colanutcollab.org. That's KOLANUTCOLLAB.org. So connect at colanutcollab.org. Just email me, and then you'll feel like, hey, this is someone you really should dip into the conversation with on the Ujamaa Hour. Just send them my way. So with that, we are here, for the final word. So one thing I just want to let folks know, you can find People's Hub at peopleshub.org, as well as on Twitter at peopleshub_.org. But are there other things that you want folks to know about People's Hub, or about Families of Color Association, or any of the other spaces and homes that you want to kind of loop in here in this last word?
Yeah, at People's Hub. So we did have a workshop that was called "I'm Not a Writer, But," and it was a writing workshop for organizers. But it's all sold out. It's completely full. But I suppose you should let us know actually if you want us to run it again, because that's a possibility that we might run it again. So we should definitely email us and say, hey, I'd like to do that the next time you run it again, because then we'll know that there's some demand. And then we do have, I want to shout out that every 2 weeks we've been running for over a year these clinic spaces, community care clinics for folks who are in movement work, who are disabled or chronically ill. So if you are disabled or have a chronic illness and you identify as being part of like movement spaces, being an organizer or an activist, we have these every 2 weeks, 2 different times. So definitely check out our website for that. And on the 22nd of September, we will be holding Remembering Elandria. So Elandria, again, was our ED and my dearest friend and sister. But we'll be having 1 year sort of remembering of Elandria on September 22nd. And that's also available on our website. You can register and get the link for that. That's coming up in about 9 days or so. But I think definitely check us out. You can sign up for our mailing list and be notified of upcoming programming. And, you can always donate or find out how you can support in other ways. We'd love to get more folks involved.
Absolutely. And folks can go to peopleshub.org, PeoplesHub.org. That link is in the chat if you are watching there live on Facebook. So drop into peopleshub.org. Lots of great workshops. I have missed more great workshops than I have attended, unfortunately. It's really, looking at that Marxism, for organizers. And I was like, man, I want to drop into that. That feels like such a commitment. I don't
They're
have
going to
it in
be
my.
running it again,
It's
but
gonna come back.
just
Yes.
it's coming back, and it's only going to be 2 sessions.
Ah, okay, okay.
So there'll be a chance. There'll be an opportunity.
Absolutely. Excellent, excellent. So, loop into People's Hub. And also, for folks who are in those local organizations, in those grassroots organizations, look at those core trainings. Reach out to People's Hub about those core trainings. I am very keen on, like, anytime I jump into, any sort of distributed, decentralized collective nowadays, I'm like, man, we really should go to these 6 core trainings. Hasn't really happened that we've actually gone through them. I've made more proposals than have been accepted. But that's certainly a space that we should be dropping into as a collective, doing that visioning, doing that dreaming together, doing those decision making and building glorious meeting spaces. So if that's a small call to action, that's a small one that I want to make. I just want to pitch to you if there are any call to actions you would like to make to folks besides the wonderful ones you've already made about care and attention and relationship building.
Um, yeah, I mean, wow, there's so many. I feel like there's like a million things. I see why people have podcasts now. There's just like so many conversations. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I would just say really, I mean, right now with the pandemic happening, still and a lot of people still suffering, really just looking into your like local mutual aid if you haven't already. I imagine most of your listeners and watchers or viewers have, are already connected, but really, if you have the support, we're going to have a circle next year or maybe later this year on like black bookstores. And so like just wherever you can, putting your money with whatever little money you have or a lot of money you have, just putting it with Black people, Indigenous people, Brown people, queer people, just really, really just remembering that like we're the most impacted by what's going on right now, and so we still need help. We still need to like be prioritized. Even it's totally okay to give your money to a Black person just because they're Black. That's what I'm gonna say. And to just to just go that extra step for somebody because they're a person of color, like just do it. Don't question it. And you can't really, I don't think you can really go wrong. So I don't know. That's kind of the most, it's kind of vague, but I would also say, oh, I like you being a thread weaver, Mike, but you mentioned, I think somewhere you had mentioned something about Just Transitions, but I wanted to mention Just Transitions too. They're doing some pretty amazing work that's also bilingual. So if folks are just interested in like sustainability or any of that kind of stuff, and it's also related to economy, check out Just Transitions. So I kind of want to give a shout out to them. So
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have been talking to Hafidha Acuay, Black woman and mother living in the Pacific Northwest, program coordinator for PeoplesHub and Families of Color Association. And I really appreciate you joining us in this conversation. And I look forward to more opportunities to collaborate and work with you further.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much, and thank you, viewers, for dropping into this edition, the September of the Ujamaa Hour. You can, you certainly can always catch us every second Monday of the month here on the Coldernut Collaborative Facebook page, and so join us for that October session. And until then, we bid you peace.